The hiring manager stared, then slid my resume back. Hank Miller, isn't it? Marcus Thorne, my old Red River boss, chuckled from the corner. Still chasing phantom threats, eh, Miller? Some of us moved on to real money. You're just a liability now. My last interview crashed, savings evaporating, a cold truth settling in. The California sun beat down through the windshield, making the asphalt shimmer ahead on I-5. Sarah Olson was asleep in the passenger seat, head tilted against the window, her breath soft and even. Eddie Stone's guitar solo filled the car, a familiar wail cutting through the drone of the highway. We were heading north, away from the sprawl, aiming for a small cabin in the foothills. A vacation, Sarah had called it. Time to figure things out. I watched the miles tick by, the flat landscape of the Central Valley blurring into a memory. My own memories started to unspool, stretching back to a time before any of this. I was 9 when my parents died in that car accident. A week later, Uncle Paul and Aunt Martha packed me and my sister Beth into their sedan and drove us to Fort Irwin, the desert base where Paul was stationed. It was a place of endless dust and hard edges, but Paul and Martha brought a kind of quiet order to it. They lived in base housing, a small, pale green house with a porch swing that never quite stopped squeaking. Paul, an Army drill sergeant, had a way of looking at things with an unblinking gaze that saw straight to the core. After a kid at school pushed Beth down and took her lunch money, Paul sat us both down. "You gotta know how to handle yourselves," he'd said, his voice low but firm. "Ain't always gonna be someone there to step in." He taught us basic self-defense, how to stand our ground, how to brace for an impact. Beth hated it, but I soaked it up, the movements feeling natural in my hands. Martha just watched, her hands twisting a dishcloth, a worry line etched between her eyebrows. When Paul retired a few years later, we moved to Santa Barbara. The ocean felt alien after the desert, too vast and unpredictable. High school was a different kind of training ground. That's where I met Gary Jensen. He moved with a quiet confidence, his eyes always scanning, observing. Karen Clark, with her bright, quick laugh, was often with him. We became a trio, inseparable, navigating the hallways in the Friday night lights. Beth, with her striking red hair, found her own path, joining the cheerleading squad. She drifted a little from our group, finding new friends, but she was the one who pointed out the way Karen looked at Gary, a slight hesitation in her gaze, a little too much attention paid to his words. I saw it too, but kept my mouth shut. Some things weren't meant for talk. After graduation, Gary and I enlisted. Infantry. Paul clapped me on the shoulder, a rare display of open pride. Martha, though, just held my hand, her grip tight. "Be careful, Hank," she whispered, her eyes watery. "Please, just be careful." We pushed through basic, through specialized training. Becoming Green Berets felt like a natural extension of Paul's early lessons. Then 9/11 hit, changing everything. Our Alpha team formed a tight unit. Captain Clint Hayes, stern and meticulous, led us. Lieutenant Elena Ramirez, sharp and no-nonsense, was his second in command. I remembered one sparring session, challenging Elena, expecting an easy win. She moved like lightning, her counterattack crisp and efficient, leaving me flat on my back. A silent acknowledgement passed between us. She was good. The years blurred with deployments, Afghanistan, Iraq, the desert dust, the heat, the constant vigilance. We saw things, did things, the details unspoken, filed away in the back of our minds. We came back, Gary and I, with honorable discharges, carrying the weight of the years. At the airport bus stop, a recruiter from Red River Private Security approached us. He spoke of good pay, specialized work, a new chapter. Gary looked skeptical. "It's just another war, Hank, but for cash," he said, shaking his head. We earned our break, but the money was substantial, promising a way to finally build something. I signed up. That first year back, I married Brenda Johnson. She was a good companion, steady and kind, but the deep current of love, the kind you read about, was never there. Our divorce was friendly, a quiet understanding that we were better as friends than a strained couple. Soon after, Red River sent me to Sierra Leone. That deployment was the end of my time with them. Too many shadows. Now working as a bodyguard, the industry felt like it was drying up. Fewer contracts, less need for ex-military types. My savings, once robust, had thinned down to a concerning level. Sarah and I, driving north on I-5, were looking for more than just a break from work. We were looking for a clear path forward, a solid ground to stand on. The cabin felt like a world away from the highway, nestled deep in the woods. Pine needles covered the ground, and the air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and distant wood smoke. We spent the first few days in a comfortable quiet, hiking the trails, watching the squirrels, and listening to the wind through the tall trees. Sarah seemed to relax, her shoulders losing some of their city tension. It was the kind of stillness I hadn't felt in a long time, the kind that promised a clean slate. One evening after we'd eaten a simple dinner of grilled trout, Sarah turned to me. "Hank," she started, her voice soft, "we need to talk about things." I knew what she meant. Our future. Kids. I'd seen her looking at families in town, a wistful look in her eyes. "Yeah," I said a little too quickly. "Lots of things to talk about, I guess." I didn't want to go there, not yet. The ground felt too soft under my feet. I stood up to clear the dishes, deflecting the conversation as I had done before. She just watched me, a small crease forming between her eyebrows. Soon after, I started to notice things. Small shifts. Sarah's phone, once an afterthought, became a constant presence. Her calls grew longer. Her voice hushed when she stepped out onto the porch. When I asked who it was, she'd give a vague answer about work, or a friend I didn't know. "Just Karen from the office," she'd say, or "Oh, no one, just checking something." The answers were too quick, too neat. One afternoon, I walked down to the small general store for more coffee. Old man Hemlock, who ran the place, nodded. "Your lady was in here the other day," he said, wiping down the counter. "Saw her with someone else, I think. Nice-looking fellow." He paused, then added, "Might have been her brother, I suppose." He shrugged, going back to his wiping. I dismissed it then. Sarah didn't have a brother. My gut, however, tightened a fraction. Gary Jensen's voice came back to me from years ago in some godforsaken desert. "Trust your gut, Hank," he'd said. "A soldier's gut feeling. It ain't just nerves. It's everything you've ever seen, heard, felt, all telling you something." I trusted Sarah. The thought felt like a shield, but a small, cold spot had formed somewhere in my middle. The evenings became different. Sarah would sit by the fire, but her attention wasn't on the flames or on me. It was on her phone, held low, her thumb moving quickly. I'd try to bridge the gap. "Want to take a walk before it gets dark?" I'd ask, or "How about a game of checkers?" She'd shake her head. "No, I'm just tired, Hank." Or, "I've got a few emails to catch up on." Her excuses piled up, small bricks building a wall between us. One night she went outside to make a call, thinking I was asleep. I heard her voice, low and urgent. I think I made a mistake," she whispered into the phone. "Things are getting complicated." The words hung in the still cabin air, sharper than any knife. I kept my breathing even, pretending to be asleep, but my mind was wide awake, racing. The next morning I tried again. "Is something wrong, Sarah?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle, watching her face as she stirred her coffee. She met my gaze for a second, then looked away. "No, Hank," she said too quickly. "Why would anything be wrong? I'm just tired, that's all." Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted the mug. The air in the cabin grew thick, heavy with unspoken things, like the humidity before a summer storm. That night, after she finally fell asleep, her phone lay on the nightstand. I reached for it, my fingers cold. Her screen unlocked with her usual pattern. I went through her messages, looking for nothing specific, just a feeling. Most were innocuous, but a few conversations were deleted. Call logs were purged. My chest felt tight. I kept digging, the quiet hum of the cabin the only sound. Then deep in her photo gallery, hidden among old pictures of us, I found it. A new folder. Disguised. Inside, a man I didn't recognize. He was smiling, close to Sarah. His arm was around her waist, their faces inches apart, her hand resting on his chest. It wasn't a casual pose. It was intimate. It was clear. The realization hit me, a physical blow to the gut. It wasn't just a seed of doubt anymore. It was a tree fully grown, its roots tearing through the ground I thought was solid. Sarah. An affair. The world tilted, the cabin spinning around me. A hollowness settled in my chest, a familiar ache from past betrayals. But this was sharper, colder, cutting deeper than anything before. The photo burned in my hand, the small screen a window into a truth I hadn't wanted to see. My gut churned, a heavy, sick feeling spreading through my chest. The vague excuses, the hushed phone calls, old man Hemlock's innocent comment, it all clicked into place. A mosaic of calculated lies. I stood there watching Sarah sleep, her face soft and unaware, and a cold anger started to simmer beneath the surface. I waited until morning, until the first weak light crept through the cabin windows. She woke slowly, stretching, then saw me standing by the bed, the phone held out. "What's wrong, Hank?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. I didn't say a word, just flipped the screen to show her the picture. My voice, when it came, was low, steady, a controlled rumble that has surprised even me. "Who is this, Sarah?" She looked at the photo, her eyes widening, then tearing up. The color drained from her face. "Oh, Hank," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can explain." She started to cry, soft, choked sounds at first, then a full-blown sob that shook her shoulders. She confessed, the words tumbling out like stones, about Roger, a colleague at work. "It was just a moment of weakness," she choked out, her hands covering her face. "I swear I still love you, Hank. This meant nothing." The words "moment of weakness" hit me like a physical blow. It was a cold rage, sharper than any wound I'd taken in the field. This wasn't a bullet, it was a blade twisted deep inside. "How long?" I asked, my voice flat. "Where? Why?" Each answer she gave was another twist of the knife. "A few months. After work drinks, then his apartment." "Loneliness," she said, feeling unheard, unseen. Each word she spoke pushed her further away, made her a stranger. She mentioned Roger's name again, the one in the photo. "He's well-connected," she said, her voice small. "Holds a pretty powerful position at the company." Roger. The name clicked. I remembered him from a couple of office parties. A man with a slick, too confident smile and a way of looking down his nose at people. His eyes had always lingered on Sarah a little too long, I realize now, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with sickening precision. The argument that followed wasn't loud. There were no raised voices, no thrown objects. The cabin remained untouched, the furniture still, but the air vibrated with a devastating quiet, the sound of a relationship shattering into irreparable pieces. Her pleas, her tears, they felt hollow, distant. Every time she reached for me, I recoiled, a coldness spreading through my veins. The man in the picture was smiling. I kept seeing that smile. Finally, I couldn't breathe the same air as her. I walked out of the cabin needing air, needing distance from the shattered pieces of my life. The night was cold, clear, the stars like pinpricks in black velvet. I got into my truck, started the engine, and just drove until the cabin was a distant glow. I parked on a dirt road overlooking a dark, silent valley and spent the night there watching the sky, feeling utterly alone, adrift in a world that had suddenly come undone. Sleep didn't come. In the morning, the light was gray, muted. I drove back, the rising sun doing little to warm the cold resolve settling over me. Sarah was waiting on the porch, her eyes red, her face puffy. "Hank," she began, rushing towards me. I held up a hand. "I need time, Sarah," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Time to think, time to figure things out." She pleaded then, tears streaming down her face, begging for forgiveness, for another chance. "Please, Hank," she cried, "don't do this." But her words felt like water on stone. My heart was a stone in my chest, heavy and unmoving. I walked into the cabin, grabbed a small duffel bag, packed a few essentials, clothes, my old military dog tags, a worn paperback. I didn't look at her again. I walked past her on the porch, got back in the truck, and drove away. No destination in mind, just away. The weight of humiliation, the feeling of being discarded, pressed down on me, fueling a quiet, nascent desire for something to be set right. A reckoning. I drove aimlessly, letting the asphalt unspool beneath the tires. Small towns, indistinguishable from each other, blurred past the windows. The radio was off, the silence inside the truck amplifying the chaos in my head. Each mile was a deliberate distance from the cabin, from Sarah, from the wreckage of what I thought we had. I pulled over at a gas station, filled the tank, and then found myself calling Gary. He answered on the second ring, his voice raspy. Hank, everything all right? I kept it vague, just things went south with Sarah, real bad. I didn't need to elaborate. Gary, being Gary, understood the unsaid. You want me to come out there? He asked, concern evident in his voice. I can be there in a few hours. I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. No, Gary, I need to figure this out on my own. I hung up, the familiar ache of loneliness settling in, but also a strange, hard resolve. My mind drifted to Brenda. Our year together, the quiet understanding, the easy separation. No drama, no accusations, just a mutual acknowledgement that we weren't meant to be. It was a stark contrast to Sarah's betrayal, a reminder of what a clean break looked like. This felt anything but clean. I remembered my time with Red River, the jobs that pushed the edge of legality, the lines I wouldn't cross. There was a particular contract in a dusty African town, a local warlord who wanted problems eliminated. They wanted us to hit a village, innocent people. I'd refused, walked away from the money, the contract. There was a code, even in that dirty business. Now that code felt flimsy. The feeling of being stripped of everything, the way Marcus Thorne had sneered at me, echoed in my ears. Stripped of my reputation, my savings, now my trust. Paul's lessons on self-defense came back. Not just the physical moves, but the mental preparation. Anticipate, observe, adapt. He'd always said, you don't just fight with your hands, Hank. You fight with your mind first. That night, parked in a nameless motel lot, I started. Roger. I pulled out my laptop, my fingers moving over the keys, researching, public profiles, company directories, news articles, his family, his address, his vulnerabilities. He was a creature of habit, a man who liked to be seen, to be admired. A chilling determination settled over me. I recognized a darker side of myself emerging, a ruthless calculation I hadn't let surface since my military days. And even then, it had been for a different purpose. Beating a monster by becoming one, I thought. The phrase hardening into a kind of grim mantra. It wasn't about violence, not directly, but about dismantling, about exposing, about making him feel what I was feeling. There was a name I'd heard through the channels, whispered among certain circles in the private security world. Dale Peterson. He wasn't a hitman, not in the traditional sense, but he was known for getting things done, for justice that didn't involve courtrooms. He operated in the shadows, a fixer for those who needed problems solved outside the lines. I found his number, a burner phone, and made the call. The conversation was brief, to the point. I didn't give details, just enough to signal the seriousness of my need. Dale listened, then gave me an address, a remote farmhouse upstate. Come alone, he said, his voice flat. Tomorrow, after dark. I hung up, a grim purpose guiding me now. The aimless driving stopped. I headed north again, towards Dale's farmhouse, the landscape becoming familiar, leading me deeper into a colder part of the country. My military training surfaced, the strategic thinking, the patience required for a long operation. This wasn't a quick strike. This was a siege. This was about leverage, about exposing. A strange, twisted sense of aliveness pulsed through me, a focus I hadn't felt since my Army days. The hurt was still there, a constant throb, but beneath it was a cold, hard certainty. I would make Roger pay. The gravel road to Dale Peterson's place was barely visible, just two faint ruts disappearing into a dense stand of pines. The air grew colder as I drove, the scent of damp earth and pine needles filling the cab. When I finally reached the clearing, a collection of unpainted outbuildings clustered around a small, functional-looking farmhouse, I knew I was off the grid. This was a place where things got done away from prying eyes. Dale was waiting on the porch, a man carved from granite. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes sharp and assessing. He didn't offer a hand, didn't smile. Hank Miller, he said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Dale? We went inside, the house spare and clean, smelling faintly of wood smoke and something metallic. I sat at a plain wooden table, and Dale settled opposite me. I told him everything, plainly, concisely. No dramatics, no emotional outbursts, just the facts. Sarah, Roger, the photo, the humiliation. I omitted nothing, the details fresh and stinging. My voice remained steady, a practiced military monotone, but the bitterness was a quiet undercurrent. Dale listened, his gaze unblinking. He didn't interrupt, just watched, occasionally nodding or asking a pointed question about Roger's position, his reputation, his family. He took it all in, processing, analyzing. When I finished, the silence hung heavy between us for a moment, punctuated only by the distant caw of a crow. "I can help you," Dale finally said, his voice flat. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "But you need to understand something, son. This ain't for the faint of heart. Once you start down this road, there's no going back. Not really. The choices you make, they stick to you." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You sure you're ready for that?" My gaze didn't waver. My resolve had only hardened in the past few days. "I understand the cost, Dale," I said, the words coming easily. "I'm ready to pay it." He nodded, a flicker of something, perhaps approval in his eyes. "Good. Then we start with him." We spent the next few hours dissecting Roger, his public image, his ambition. Those were his weaknesses, Dale explained. A man who built his life on reputation had the most to lose. Our initial plan would focus on exposing him, professionally and socially. Not physical harm, Dale clarified, but a systematic dismantling of his carefully constructed life. I left Dale's place with a new clarity. The abstract idea of getting even had transformed into a concrete operation. I started gathering intelligence, utilizing every skill from my military and private security background. Public records, social media deep dives, discreet inquiries through old contacts. I set up surveillance, a careful dance of observation. Roger's routines, his movements, his habits, his associates. I watched him from my car, from coffee shops, from the shadows becoming a ghost in his periphery. A growing sense of detachment settled over me. Roger and Sarah weren't people anymore. They were targets, pieces on a board. I felt a cold clinical efficiency, almost like my old army days, but twisted for a different kind of war. Dale introduced me to his network, quiet, competent individuals who could gather information discreetly without leaving a trace. One of them found it. Roger's history, not just Sarah, but others, interns, junior colleagues, women who felt pressured, used, then discarded. A pattern of predatory behavior, swept under the rug by his power and influence. The revelation solidified my conviction. He wasn't just a man who'd made a mistake, he was a monster, a predator. And monsters, I reminded myself, needed to be put down. Life had a way of presenting choices, each with a price tag. Sometimes you only saw the full cost years down the line. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. A quiet satisfaction settled within me as the meticulous planning, the careful chess moves began to take shape. The initial phase of the plan unfolded like a slow-moving current, subtle and insidious, designed to erode from within. Dale had connections, people who knew how to plant a quiet word, how to send an anonymous email that looked like it came from inside the system. We started with Roger's company. A rumor here, a question there, hinting at questionable professional ethics, a pattern of cutting corners for personal gain. Nothing overt, just enough to make a few key people look twice at his expense reports, his project allocations. At the same time, discreet, untraceable tips went to Sarah's workplace. Nothing about the affair directly, but hints of her involvement in a larger, fabricated scandal connected to Roger's questionable practices. Enough to make her supervisors view her with a new, colder assessment. Roger's personal life began to show cracks. Whispers started following him at charity events, at golf club dinners. Dale's people were good at managing perception, at feeding just enough truth and insinuation into the social currents. I watched him from a distance, observing his discomfort, the way his slick smile faltered when he thought no one was looking. Sarah, meanwhile, felt the pressure build. I saw her in town, looking over her shoulder, her eyes darting around. She grew increasingly paranoid, agitated. Her phone, once her constant companion, now seemed to be a source of constant stress. Her confidence, once so unwavering, was visibly eroding. I arranged for Sarah to accidentally overhear a damning conversation. It happened at a crowded coffee shop near her office. Two of Dale's operatives, posing as disgruntled former colleagues, spoke loudly enough for Sarah to catch snippets about Roger's past financial dealings, his willingness to throw others under the bus. Her face, when she walked past their table, was pale, her expression a mix of shock and dawning dread. More situations were orchestrated to expose Roger's true nature to key colleagues. A seemingly accidental email sent to the wrong distribution list detailing his manipulative tactics on a past project. A leaked memo highlighting his tendency to take credit for others' work. Slowly, deliberately, the picture of a self-serving, ruthless man began to emerge in the minds of those who mattered. Roger, feeling the ground shift beneath him, started to lash out. I observed him at a company function, his voice sharper, his patience thinner. He snapped at a junior manager, publicly contradicted a senior VP. He was creating his own enemies, fueling the very fire we had started. I watched Sarah and Roger's relationship fray. Public arguments became more frequent, hushed at first, then escalating into terse exchanges outside the office. Her once polished appearance started to look strained. Her clothes, expensive as ever, seemed to hang on a frame that looked thinner, more fragile. The sparkle in her eyes was gone, replaced by a constant, nervous watchfulness. "Stay focused, Hank," Dale had reminded me over a crackling phone line. "Don't let personal feelings cloud the objective. We're building a case, not settling a score with anger." His words were a cold shower, washing away any fleeting satisfaction I might have felt. This wasn't about emotion, it was about strategy. Still, a grim satisfaction settled in my chest as I watched Roger's carefully constructed life begin its slow, inevitable crumble. He was a man who lived by appearances, and those appearances were now being systematically dismantled. Then came the breakthrough, a key piece of evidence uncovered by Dale's tenacious team. Roger's financial impropriety, not just cutting corners, but outright embezzlement, carefully hidden within a complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts. This was the leverage. This was the weapon. I prepared for the next phase, the public exposure. This would be the true strike, not a whisper, but a shout. I felt a mix of dread and anticipation, knowing that the consequences would be far-reaching, not just for Roger, but for everyone involved, including myself. Life, I had learned, was a series of choices, each with a price. Sometimes you only saw the full cost years down the line, whether you paid it willingly or not. The headline screamed from the front page of the Tribune, "Corporate executive embroiled in embezzlement scandal." Roger's face, a grainy photo from a company website, he looked back at me, smug and unconcerned. Not anymore. The story, backed by irrefutable evidence of financial misconduct and carefully documented shell corporations, hit like a bomb. It caused an immediate media frenzy, local news channels picking up the story, followed by national business outlets. An internal investigation at Roger's company was launched before noon. His carefully cultivated world began to unravel. Roger was publicly disgraced. His reputation, years in the making, was shattered, replaced by a picture of a deceitful opportunist. His career, once a sure thing for the top, hung by a thread already fraying. Sarah, implicated by association in the anonymous tips that had hinted at her knowledge of Roger's dealings, faced the full brunt of the company's inquiry and growing public scorn. Her name, once respected, now appeared in online comments linked to the scandal. I arranged to meet Sarah in a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. She walked in looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were sunken, her usually impeccable hair disheveled. I watched her approach, my face devoid of any emotion. I ordered black coffee. She didn't order anything. "You knew the cost, Sarah," I told her, my voice low and steady across the small table, mirroring Dale's earlier warning to me. "You understood the risks." She stared at me, then her face crumpled. "You did this, Hank," she whispered, her voice raw. "You ruined my life, everything I worked for. My job, my reputation. It's all gone." You wanted revenge and you took everything. There was no remorse, no apology for her part in it, just an accusation thrown at me. She refused to take responsibility. Your choices, Sarah, I reminded her, the words like stones dropping into a deep well. Your betrayal. You chose that path. I just exposed the truth. Her eyes, when they met mine, were full of a desperate, desolate anger. Roger, meanwhile, made his move. He'd tried to escape. Dale had anticipated it. A private jet chartered for a flight to a country with no extradition treaty, a final attempt to salvage what he could of his stolen wealth. But Dale's network was faster, broader. We intercepted him at the small private airfield, not with force, but with a quiet, efficient display of legal paperwork and irrefutable evidence that left him cornered. The confrontation was chillingly effective. No punches, no shouting, just Roger, standing there, his expensive suit rumpled, his face ashen, facing Dale's lawyer and a few stern-faced officials. The lawyer laid out the charges, the overwhelming evidence, the options. Cooperate or face the full force of the law. Roger looked like a man watching his world vanish into smoke. Before I left, I walked past him. He didn't look up. You thought you were smarter than everyone, Roger, I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the sterile air. Just another small-town boy who got too big for his britches, thinking nobody would ever notice. His head snapped up, his eyes meeting mine, filled with a raw, impotent rage. He knew I had seen him, truly seen him, for the hollow man he was. His hypocrisy, his weakness, laid bare. His world collapsed. His wife filed for divorce the next day, taking their children and cutting him off. His family, once proud, publicly disavowed him. His future prospects vanished, replaced by the grim reality of legal battles and impending ruin. Sarah, stripped of her job and her standing in the community, faced a bleak, uncertain future. A fleeting moment of emptiness settled over me. The vengeance, once a burning need, now felt hollow, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. I looked at the widespread damage, a crater where lives once were, and questioned if the price was worth it. For me, for them, for everyone involved, the cost had been steep. Word count 887. The immediate aftermath left a trail of wreckage. Roger faced a barrage of legal troubles. His assets were frozen, his reputation in tatters, and the criminal charges for embezzlement loomed large. He was ostracized, former colleagues avoiding his calls, his name becoming synonymous with deceit. I saw a picture of him in the local paper, leaving court, his expensive suit now looking ill-fitting, his eyes hollowed. The smugness was gone. Sarah, completely isolated, found the world closing in. Her professional network, once her pride, had evaporated. Attempts to find new work were met with polite rejections or outright recognition. She'd been seen as Roger's accomplice, the other woman in a high-profile scandal. Her name, once whispered with envy, was now a byword for misfortune. Her choices now etched in the public record. I felt a strange blend of satisfaction and a profound weariness. The hunt was over, the target neutralized, but the adrenaline had drained, leaving an emptiness that was more profound than any physical fatigue. The aliveness I'd felt earlier, that sharp focus, had receded, replaced by a quiet hum of exhaustion. Gary called, his voice serious. I saw the news, Hank. Everything all right? He didn't ask if I was involved, he just knew. Yeah, Gary, I said, it's done. There was a beat of silence. You gotta do what you gotta do, I guess, he finally said, his understanding evident, though it carried a note of resignation. Gary understood the dark corners a man could be pushed into. I spent days driving, reflecting on the transformation within myself. The coldness I'd cultivated, the detachment. It had been a necessary weapon, a shield. But now it lingered, a part of me that felt foreign and yet terribly familiar. I drove back to my old hometown, the streets of Santa Barbara, a quiet, melancholic journey into the past. I found Paul on his porch swing, just like old times, watching the distant ocean. He didn't ask about Sarah, didn't ask about Roger. He just looked at me, his gaze seeing past the surface. You look tired, son, he said, his voice softer than I remembered. We sat in silence for a long time. Then he spoke again, his wisdom quiet, distilled from years of observing human nature. Justice can feel cold, son, he said, staring out at the waves, sometimes colder than the wound itself. His words settled on me, heavy and true. Later, walking through a grocery store, I saw Brenda Johnson, my ex-wife. She looked good, healthy, a faint smile on her face as she pushed a cart. We exchanged a brief, cordial interaction. "Hank," she said, a little surprised, "it's good to see you." We talked about nothing for a minute, the weather, her new job. There was no bitterness, no anger, just a simple, unburdened politeness. It reminded me of simpler times, of a life that felt lighter, less complicated. I contemplated the nature of that aliveness I'd felt at the beginning of this path. Was it true life, a reconnection to purpose, or just the adrenaline of the hunt, a dangerous flicker of energy fueled by rage? The line between the two felt blurred. The public opinion was divided, as Dale had predicted. Some saw me as a hero, a man who had brought a powerful predator to justice. Others, a vengeful monster, a man who had taken the law into his own hands, destroying lives in the process. I felt the weight of those moral consequences, the shadow of my actions stretching long behind me. I knew I couldn't go back to the person I was before Sarah's betrayal, before the decision to pursue Roger. That man was gone, replaced by someone harder. Someone who had looked into the abyss and hadn't flinched. I called Dale, a professional conversation. "It's done," I told him. "Our partnership is over." He understood. No questions, no lingering. Just a quiet agreement. The path forward was unclear, paved only with the dust of destruction. Months crawled by, each one blurring into the next. I tried to find a new routine, a semblance of normalcy. Woke early, worked out, looked for odd security jobs that didn't involve anything resembling what Dale and I had done. But the hours stretched long, filled with a quiet that felt less like peace and more like a void. Sleepless nights were common, the faces of Roger and Sarah, their ruined expressions replaying behind my eyelids. The accusations, the raw pain, it all cycled through my mind. Gary called often, his persistent presence a tether to something sane. "You need to get out, Hank," he'd say. "Reconnect with people. It ain't good to be alone stewing." He encouraged me to seek support, to not let the silence consume me. His voice was a steady current in the turmoil. I started volunteering at a local veterans outreach center. It was quiet work, helping old soldiers navigate paperwork, listening to their stories. Some were broken, some just needed an ear. In their quiet struggles, I found a different kind of purpose, a small sense of usefulness that didn't involve stealth or calculated destruction. It was here, listening to the quiet dignity of men and women who had seen real wars, that I slowly started to realize true healing wasn't just about destroying the source of pain. It was about building something new. One afternoon, I ran into Karen Clark at the coffee shop near the center. It had been years since I'd seen her, not since high school, not since the last time I'd seen her with Gary before the deployments. She recognized me instantly, a warm smile on her face. We talked for a while about nothing much, just catching up. She mentioned a rough patch in her own life, a betrayal by a close friend. "It took me a long time," she said, stirring her coffee. "But I realized holding on to the anger just hurt me more. Forgiveness ain't for them, Hank. It's for you to move on." Her words, simple and direct, hit me harder than any of Paul's lectures. A surprising perspective coming from her. I began to understand that vengeance, while potent, a powerful, intoxicating drug, didn't always bring peace. It brought quiet, yes, the quiet of a field after a harvest, but it was a bitter, empty kind of quiet. I thought about my parents gone too soon, about Paul and Martha, the steady rock they'd been, the family I chose, the easy love they offered without conditions. My future with Sarah was irrevocably broken, a fact I now accepted with a heavy, resigned heart. There was no going back, no fixing what had been done. Slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild my life. Not as the vengeful monster Dale had helped me become, but as a man who had survived, who had carried out a terrible act, and was now left to live with the consequences. I realized the true price of my actions was not just Roger's downfall, not just Sarah's ruin, but a part of my own soul. A piece had been sacrificed to the need for justice, for retribution. One evening, I found myself standing alone on a quiet road, looking out over a vast Midwestern field at sunset. The sky bled orange and purple, the horizon stretching endless. The pain was still there, a dull ache, but the lessons were clearer now. The difficult road ahead stretched out, unyielding. I was Hank Miller, a man irrevocably changed by betrayal and vengeance, beginning the arduous journey of finding his own quiet redemption. The path was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like my own.